we've got people who are now in charge of writing grants and want to kind of update their skill set since they haven't done that in a few years. We got individuals who are, trying to figure out the science of writing a grant. Every grant's a little bit different, so learning how they can what an overall approach might be. And some folks who are just interested in learning more about this BCYF process. For those of us who are here, we've got the majority of us this is our first time applying for this funding opportunity with the Baltimore City Youth Fund. We've got someone here is a previous grant recipient and some who have applied in the past. A good number of us, this is the first time first time writing grant, never done a proposal or application before. Some of us, a good number of us are looking to understand specifics, application questions, and how to approach those application questions. And another good number of us are understanding how to assemble supporting documents and knowing how to submit them. So thank you all for providing those insights. That'll definitely help us curate the information we provide to what you are interested in learning. Okay. Getting my screens set up again here. Thank you for your patience.
I was jumping real quick, Naya, just so I can lay a little quick foundation for everybody. My name is Kiana Ariate Amin. I'm a TA provider supporting the Baltimore Children and Youth Fund. And what you're here today for is the deep dive session. So what does that mean? You get the opportunity to take advantage of two of our most awesome technical assistance providers as we have a guided conversation right around introduction to grant writing, but there's also going to be time at the end for question and answers. And keep in mind that starting April 1st, you'll have the opportunity to work with a technical assistance provider for an hour, right? To go through your application, to support any questions that you might have, and to help you really get that hands-on attention. So without further ado, I want to go ahead and get the floor over to Naya and Karen. And if you have any questions as they're talking, please put your questions into the chat and we will support you in answering those questions as we move along. And I'm going to disappear in the background. Y'all have a good time.
Thanks, Kieta. As Kieta said, all right, there, the click's working now. My name is Naya Vanterpool. I am a native South Dakotan, graduated from the University of South Dakota with an English and political science major, worked at a writing center for 3 years. My nonprofit experience has been pretty diverse. I served as an AmeriCorps Vista. I've been a program implementer and designer, a corporate and public foundation grant writer, and a deputy director overseeing a staff of 24. I'm just proud to be bringing my operational experience and grant writing experience to the BCYF team and my grant writing experience to you all tonight. I do love Red Bull and Doritos. Just a fun fact about me. It just is a great combination. And I'll toss it over to my colleague, Kieran Smith, to introduce herself.
Good evening. Thank you, Naya. And Naya is being so kind and humble. He is a professional writer. And so you all are in for a treat, hopefully, as part of the session today, that he shares some of his tips and how to really level up your writing for your grant proposals. So a little bit about me. My name is Kieran. It rhymes with the word hearing. And I'm a native New Yorker. I've been in Baltimore since 2006. This is my home. I'm raising my kids here. I am a Howard University grad. I actually have an engineering background. That's how I started my career as a civil engineer in private and government sectors. And then I made a transition after my children were born into the nonprofit space formally, although I have many years of experience as an actual community organizer and a board member of various organizations throughout the years. And I own own consulting firm, Amana Consulting. And I love tea. I'm a tea person. You almost can always find me with a cup of tea, and chai, particularly Kashmiri chai, is one of my favorites. So that's a little bit about me. Excited to present to you all today and also hear from you some of the things that you're looking to get some support on, so that we can make this a win-win for you as well as for BCYF.
Whoa, we hear from other folks? I thought that I got to do all the talking tonight.
I meant from the guests in terms of their questions.
Oh, okay. Understood. I guess we'll share the space. So y'all, tonight we have a lot to cover, and grant writing can be pretty dense material. So as Kieran said, we do encourage you to ask questions. If you have a burning question, please just raise your hand. We'll pause and we'll take questions as we go. If you have an insight that you would like to share because you've written grants before, you've got some experience that's relevant, please raise your hand. We invite you to share. If you'd like to drop your question in the chat, feel free to do that. My colleague Kieta will be monitoring the chat for questions, and we'll call those into the room as they are received. Our objectives today are to go over some of the learning goals and objectives, our agenda today. We will introduce you to some grant writing principles that kind of help you set the tone for how you can approach grant writing. And then we will define an approach to building your proposal. That will include some strategic planning by creating a value proposition, understanding what the funder requirements are, developing a budget, some understanding how to craft a compelling narrative, and some things to keep in mind, some key considerations of what you should do and should not do when you're writing a grant. We'll share some resources at the end and leave some time for Q&A. And if you are so willing, we will invite you to complete a post survey. Are there any questions about our agenda before we move forward? Awesome. So our goals today are to demystify the grant writing process and equip you with the information needed to develop winning proposals and to answer your questions. You'll notice here that these goals are pretty general. Just as in when you're doing your work, crafting your vision and your mission, there is the general thing that you are setting out to do, and then there's the more specific thing that you are targeting. So our specific objectives today are to ensure that you walk away with an understanding of how to assess funding opportunities that are suitable and feasible, meaning that they suit your organization, they fit you well, they're well aligned, and that they can actually be achieved by you within the capacity that you have. We want to specifically help you develop work plans for building the proposal. We want to help you prepare realistic budgets and compelling narratives, at least help you approach building realistic budgets and compelling narratives. And we want to help you avoid some common grant writing mistakes. We can't necessarily give you a completed workbook today, but we want to give you a good jump start and have you follow up with one-on-one TA on those areas where you'll need assistance. All right. So the first principle of grant writing, really the first principle of doing nonprofit work, is to complete your pre-work. For those of you who have been in the nonprofit space for any amount of time, you know that grants are going to require you to show that you are established. You've got a board, you're sharing a board list. You've got a staff, you're sharing a staff list, maybe staff bios and resumes. You've got financial management operations and a budget and financial statements. If you're going after federal grants, they'll ask for everything. They'll ask for your consent forms and your waivers. They'll ask for your proof of insurance. You have to ensure, as you're approaching grants, that you have established yourself as a compliant business entity. In the state of Maryland, that's a non-stock corporation, and you have to ensure that you have the documentation to prove that you are an established entity. Without this compliance work being done, you're going to get frustrated through the process by the questions that they're asking that you're just not able to complete. So make sure that you have done your pre-work. Kieran, anything to add before I move to the next principle?
The only thing I was thinking was just in terms of if there are any organizations on tonight that are fiscally sponsored, much of that regulatory compliance will fall to your sponsor. However, you being proactive and supporting them and giving them the information that they need to accurately and effectively document your activities with your organization, right? So wherever you fall in the spectrum, whether you have your own 501c3, whether you are under the umbrella of a fiscal sponsor, doing everything that you can to make sure that you are in place. The one other thing I would add is if you are doing work that has separate regulations associated with it. So I'll use food service, for example, making sure that you're in compliance with those regulations for food service or whatever may apply to the services and activities that your organization does. You want to put your best foot forward when you get in front of that funder or those funders.
After you've established your organization, you've registered your business, you have your tax exempt status, you've got your articles and corporations, your bylaws, your board is functioning. You are now ready to write grants, invite investments from philanthropists. When it comes to grant writing, it really is more of an art than a science. And it's a fairly academic art at that. It is something that does invite you to tell a story through research and through numbers. It does invite telling that story in a logical, developmental way, but it's not something that you can really say A plus B is C. It is an art in the way that you get to tell your organization's story, and it is an academic exercise in the way that you do end up having to apply a certain logic model to the work that you do. So when you are approaching grant writing, invite yourself to think creatively and invite yourself to try and tell your story in a logical flow. Kieran?
Yes, I just have to say this particular graphic that Naya chose for our presentation today is apt. It's really kind of laying everything out and making an assessment on what is, what you're putting forth in front of a funder, what's the best strategy and approach for that funder. It may be a different strategy than you used for a previous funder or this particular opportunity. So really kind of just laying everything out and putting it out there as to, okay, what is it that we're doing? What are our goals? How do we align with this funder? And really just approaching it that way. And the art component to this is that there is no magic formula for writing a grant. There's a number of different things that you're going to want to take into consideration, and that's what we're going to try to touch on for you today.
Our third principle is that you're only going to be able to hit a target if you first take your aim. Right? You're only going to be able to hit a target if you first take your aim. Grant writing is going to make you be clear about what you need and what you're developing. You're going to have to take your aim at a specific ask. If you are going for general operating dollars, which means you just want to support your entire operations, you're going to have to make clear what is your organization going to reach? What is that next level that those general operating dollars are going to support? For most grant funders, you're going to need to make a specific program ask, like this program in this year is going to generate these outcomes, and because we are going to invest these dollars in this way. You're only going to be able to hit your target if you first take your aim. That means down to articulating your vision, your mission, your approach, and your program outcomes and activities with clarity. Kieran, anything to add? Pardon me. All right, principle 4 is that in order for you to start clarifying your targets and your aims, we encourage you to design with the end in mind. This means really knowing what your impacts are of your organization. That means who are the people that you're serving? What are the conversions within those people that you're serving? Are you serving students and you're moving them from not being entrepreneurial to entrepreneurial? Are you moving them from not having a network of support to having a network of support? So who are you serving? What are the program's impacts that you're directly making? And what are those ripple effects? How do you strengthen your community's lives through the networking effect? How do you create opportunities for them down the road? But you have to be able to design with the end in mind by really envisioning not necessarily where are you going to be in 10 years from now, but how the impact that you are making has a multiplier effect for that individual and the community that you're building. Kieran? Awesome. Principle 5, and y'all, this is a very important one. Having a relationship with a funder increases your chances. You know, that there are funding opportunities where it is difficult for that to be true. Again, if you find yourself down the road pursuing federal grants, you know, they do a pretty good job of putting firewalls up between you and the people who are making the decisions. But if you are fundraising within a city, going after city backed dollars or a state backed dollars or public foundations, it makes a difference to know the funders. In my experience, if you do not have a funder relationship, it's really not even 50-50. It's more like 40-60. All funders get more asks than money they have to deliver. If you have gone back to the same funder multiple years, you maybe have flipped that 60-40. But if you have a relationship with a funder, you can probably increase your odds to above that 60%, but it's still not a guarantee. You'll never have more than an 80% chance at a grant because it's just an incredibly competitive space. But knowing that funder, having that internal advocate, knowing there's someone on the review team who can add additional insight, it can make a difference down the road. All right, Kieran, just jump in on these next two. If you, I'm going to toss number 7 over to you, Kieran, for the side-by-side, just to give you that heads up. All right, so principle number 6 is to evaluate your proposal from a funder's perspective. While you are the expert in your work and you might like your work to go a certain way, you need to be mindful, just like if you were a job seeker looking to get a job, you would want to curate your resume for what that specific business does. You can't have a stock proposal that applies to absolutely every ask without adjusting that ask. You have to be mindful of what that mutual benefit is. The funder has an interest in the impact that they want to generate with their gift. So it behooves you to speak to the funder's priorities and to edit whatever your general proposal is to meet and align with their priorities. It doesn't mean you give ownership over to them, but it means that you have been thoughtful about how you and this funder are going to partner. All right, I'm going to toss it. Go ahead, Kieta.
A question about the funder relationship and how do you establish that relationship with the funder? How do you get into the door? Any best practices?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And for some funders, it's very difficult. If you are going to a funder cold, look at their website. If you're just getting started in grant making and you don't have a connected board, look for funders that have a program officer. Program officers are typically, sometimes on the websites, they tell you that they're open to meetings. And some program officers don't post their emails, tells you that there may be less open to meetings, but there are grant funders out there who make it known that we have a program officer and we want to build relationships with community members. So use that as one of your criteria. Is this a funder for me? Work with the funders who have a more open process and a more open dialogue. Build your reputation in the funding community and you'll start to see that you are gaining exposure and gaining invitations from other funders who maybe have a little bit more of a closed door. So if you're going completely cold, if you don't have a broad network, you're going to want to use as a criteria looking for funders that have program officers who take meetings. Other things that you can do, there are certain funders in Baltimore who they have outward facing programs, and they actually have kind of a prerequisite that you be in their community, and that'll increase your likelihood of getting an invitation or a grant. Two of them that come to mind are T. Rowe Price and Annie Casey Foundation. They do a lot of community programming, and they want you to plug into their network and apply to those grants. And that'll give you an opportunity to connect with their employees and some of the people who are reviewing their applications. So, Annie Casey Foundation, they're not gonna, they often don't open their grants opportunities until a few months before they're gonna be available. They don't have a rolling grant, but you can plug into their community and well ahead of those grant openings so that you are starting to build those relationships and planting those seeds. Kieran, are there any tips that you would share?
I think those are really great. I was also thinking, pre-pandemic, we had a lot more opportunities to kind of get to know people and network in in-person spaces. And it's a lot more challenging to do that now. However, a lot of organizations, funders included, are doing virtual events. And what I have found is if you make a point of attending these things, these events that these funders are hosting, and then send a follow-up communication to that presenter to get on their radar. To say, hey, I attended the session, I really enjoyed it. If you had a question or something like that, try to begin to make a connection with that funder. The other thing, I'm going to put this information in the chat. There is a book which I have found to be a very valuable resource, and it's called The Grant Seeker's Guide to Winning Proposals. It's about 500 pages, which is a heavy read, but what's nice about this book is that it shows you how funders responded to actual proposals that they received. It gives you insight into how they are making their decisions for a variety of different programs and a variety of different organizations and a variety of different industries. And so it has some very valuable insight into how they are approaching evaluating your proposal when it comes across to them, and also what they need from you to convince their board and their decision makers to invest in you. So earlier in the presentation, Naya mentioned that it's not always enough just to know someone at that organization or have a relationship. That may or may not be the decision maker, right? They may then have to convince someone to, take a step to invest in your organization's work. So you want to make sure that you're answering the kind of questions that they will be asking themselves as they're reviewing it. So I'll put the ISBN number in the chat. It is available like on Amazon and things like that. And search for that book. You might even be able to find it in some academic libraries if you have access to those. But it's a good resource to keep on hand so you can kind of see, what are other folks doing? How are funders responding to what other folks are doing? And begin to get a broad perspective on how you might approach things for your work that you do. So I'll put that in the chat.
Absolutely. And also one of those communities that you can follow online and attend their events and be in community with many funders, program officers, is the Maryland Philanthropy Network. They are another organization that has a broad community, and the Baltimore Community Foundation. So plug into the funding community and start building that network. All right, Kieran, I'm going to toss it over to you for Principle 7.
Yes, and I think there was a question in the chat, so I'm just going to backtrack just a little bit. There was a question, when should you do a letter of interest or inquiry? The first question to ask is, does a funder want you to do one? There are some funders who don't want that. There are some funders that require that. So the first step is, if you're thinking about a funder or a funding opportunity, get to know that funder's process and their expectations and honor them, right? So if it's required, of course, you're going to do it when it's required. If it's not clear, see if there's some way to reach out to that funder and ask, are you all accepting letters of inquiry. We're interested. We think that there is synergy with your priorities and the work that our organization does. And let them tell you, but it starts with getting to know what that funder requires and adhering to their process that they have. I hope that answers the question. So in this principle here, using data to make your proposal compelling. Some of you may have attended some of the TA sessions for other funding opportunities in which they did like deep dives into data. That's not the subject of this presentation today, but we wanted to just touch on it. And so how you can use data to really make it stronger. I just have to say a disclaimer here. These examples that we'll be showing you today are not like templates for you to kind of go and then plug and chug your information into them and kind of use them like that. It's really just to show through comparative analysis, like how you can go from one level of a response to maybe a more effective level in your response to questions that you may be answering on your proposal. So here you have a question. This organization is answering the question, what is the project? Basically, describe your project, right? And so this organization is saying the project will serve children who attended public school in Baltimore City. The children will learn valuable leadership skills that will equip them with the skills needed to become productive contributors to their communities. So I want you all in the chat to tell me your initial thoughts in reading that response to the question, describe your program or your project. What are your initial thoughts in reading that response? And we'll give you a second just to read it over again if you need to. It could be one word. It could just be questions you have. Do you think it's great? Do you think it could be improved? Thoughts on that?
If you were the reviewer, what questions would you have?
It's very broad is one comment, okay? Looking for a little more, okay, too generic. Overall captures the essence of the program, okay? Maybe one or two more comments. What ages, some specificity, right? There's a lot of children in Baltimore City, right? What classes? So I think you guys get the idea here that there's, are they children of color? Right, it doesn't say, it just says children who attend public school in Baltimore City, which is a lot of kids, a lot of different backgrounds, a lot of different ages. A little more specificity. So in this next example, organization B had the same question, and this is how they responded to that question. Oh, can you advance, Naya, to the next, just like it should come. So organization B's response was, the project will serve 100 children who attend public school in the high-risk communities identified in the strategic plan. Last year, over 40% of students lived in the 21217 zip code. The children will spend 60 contact hours over the course of 8 weeks in leadership development workshops. At the conclusion of the project, we will conduct an assessment that includes a multiple choice test and a hands-on problem-solving challenge. Since 2000, over 70% of our students have obtained college degrees and report assuming leadership roles in their schools and communities after completing our program. Thoughts in the chat as it compares to organization A's response. I give them all my money. Okay, someone was convinced. A smiley face, much more information, very clear, love the specific data, okay? So this is not to say that organization B's response is perfect. There are probably some things that could even be improved to make it even stronger. I see very detailed, right? But in comparison to organization A, it's far more specific, right? Gives a funder much more information to, as the comment says, to encourage the funder, okay, now you've piqued my interest. You're giving me some numbers. I have a sense of the number of kids, where they're coming from, the 21217 zip code. I have a sense of what happens after they leave your program and how that connects to what you're doing with your leadership. Okay, I'm interested now. And so this is what you want to do for your proposals. You want to give the funder a level of specificity that they get a clear picture into what it is that you're trying to do. You also want to stand out in comparison to the organizations that did not take that step to be more specific, right? So if I'm a funder and I have these two proposals in front of me and I really want to, give this money, which some funders are obligated, particularly private foundations, they're obligated to give a percentage of their funding every year. So I may say, you know what, let's go with organization B. Maybe could have been a little better, but compared to the other applicants that we got, theirs was the strongest. We want to go ahead and recommend B for an award, right? And so when you're putting your proposals together, you want to think about the kind of data that you have on your constituents. Who are they? And how do you know who they are? And also, how do you know that the need that you identified, they also believe is a need, right? So sometimes we have this top-down approach. We say, oh, I really would want to do this in this community. I think it would be great. Did that community say, yes, that's what they want to do? Did you do in a survey? Did you do some sort of assessment? And then at the end here, there's a statement. It says, since 2000, over 70% of our students have obtained college degrees. How would they know that in the chat? How would they know that to be able to convey that to a funder? How would they know what has happened? Data collection, hit it right on the nail. They track the students. A survey after the program was completed, good follow-up. So sometimes when we talk about data, it's a little difficult sometimes. What kind of data should I be collecting? Something that's very valuable for your organization is to keep in contact with the children that come through your program, the youth that come through your program, and follow up with them. Have you been able to obtain the job that we were trying to give you skills, to land? Have you been able to go on to higher education? Have you been able to start your own business? Many organizations are doing entrepreneurship-based programming. Following up with them and then being able to report that back to your funders and your supporters. Here's what we've been able to do. But you got to design with that in mind, right? You can't do it after the fact. You got to design your program and your plan with that in mind. So I just wanted to share that with you. I hope that this very simplistic example hopefully demonstrated how you can level up your response to some of these questions and really make your organization stand out in comparison to some other competitors that may be in that same space.
Awesome. Yes. Awesome. Amazing. Thank you. All of that. Yeah, there's so much that is inferred by what you write. You know, like you get to see that you're savvy, you have systems through how you're conveying your mission and your approach. So well demonstrated, Kieran. Thank you. So now that you have a framework for some of the principles and how you should approach grant writing, you know, you're going to get your organization established, you're going to take your aim, you're going to have the end in mind, you're going to be mindful of what the funder's priorities are, and you are going to ensure that you're integrating data so that you're showing that you're research backed and that you have savvy systems. Now it brings you to what funding opportunities do you actually want to go after? What's worth your time, right? Like time is of the essence, and time is also a scarce commodity. We unfortunately cannot replicate it. When you're looking at a funding opportunity, I encourage you to think about three different areas of alignment. One is accessibility, one is alignment, and the last is feasibility. I used to keep a moves manager that had different weights measured 1 to 3 and then multiplied out, so I could see like actually who was worth going after. How do I prioritize a list of 25 funders? But some general questions that you can ask yourself if you don't have a spreadsheet that calculates it for you is, in terms of accessibility, do you have a past or current relationship with the funder? If you have that relationship in place, if you've gone after that funding opportunity before and there's some name recognition there, that's a reason to raise them up in priority. It'll increase your likelihood because you have a stronger connection there. If you don't have that relationship, do you know anyone else who does? And also, has the funder extended a personal invitation for you to apply? Some funders, they have you might run into this. We do not accept unsolicited proposals or invitation only. So if you see a funder like that, you'll only ever be invited to apply. But then other times you'll meet somebody in the community and they'll invite you to apply, and then you'll want to refer back to them. You'll want to consider alignment. because not every partner is a good partner. Not all money is good money. And some grant writing is a wasted effort, especially if it's not aligned. So you'll want to ask yourself and look at their website, what is the funder's eligibility criteria? There are one of the easiest ways that you'll stumble into wasted grant writing is because you didn't look at their catchment area. They might not be Baltimore City focused. They might be Baltimore County focused. You didn't look at their giving priorities. They're not really interested in education. They're interested in human services, or vice versa. You might have asked for salaries and overhead, things that they consider to be overhead, when they only give to projects and programming. So you'll want to take a look at what are those eligibility guidelines. Make sure you're not writing a grant when you were never eligible in the first place. You want to take a look at the funder's giving history. Are there other organizations that are like yours that have been funded in the past? Greater chance that they'll fund you in the future. And you'll want to, of course, consider their priorities. Most funders are clear about whether they give to education, health, human services, whether they do or do not give to religious affiliated organizations, whether they prioritize leadership development, whether or not they give to advocacy initiatives. They'll typically make that clear somewhere on their website or on the request for information. And then you'll want to ask yourself, what elements of the program, of my program, of our programs, align to their priorities? If you are an after-school program, in short, do your homework on them beforehand. If you're an after-school program and you offer myriad youth clubs, but the organization only supports health and wellness or only supports mental health, you'll just want to focus on maybe the social emotional learning component of your work. And then lastly is feasibility. Have you reviewed all of the available application material? Have you looked at the performance period? Is it covering the amount of time that you need that funding? And then are there reporting requirements that you can actually take on? BCYF is going to require you to submit monthly financial reports, quarterly program reports, and occasional site visits. Are you prepared to take on those responsibilities? And then you'll want to ask yourself, do we have a budget that aligns to this request? And are we actually able to make the deadline? These are just general questions to ask yourself to qualify the opportunity and see whether or not it is one that you should reasonably approach. All right, let's see a question or a comment in the chat. In regards to only funding programming versus overhead, what happens when the organization is that one program? Is it okay to build that overhead into the programming side? Monique, I'm not sure that I understand the question. Can you clarify?
Yes. Oops, sorry, I have you on two devices. Hold on 1 second.
Oh, good.
Okay, I think it's good now. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so some grants that say, hey, we're only going to take care of the programming, don't tell us anything about the operations. But the programming has a program manager. It has a person there, as well as supplies and other things that are needed besides, for example, in my case, assistance with rent. So they may only want to pay for, or they may only say programming as if they only want to hear about the rental side and not want to hear about the costs associated with running the program. But it is that one program.
Yeah. That I ran into this last week, writing a general operating grant with an organization that had primarily gone after programming. And the distinction that hopefully it's helpful for you is that it's like telling the organization story versus telling a student story or an impact story. So, for this organization, they provide, so this organization mobilizes change for the child welfare sector, and they do that through growing their membership of partners and providing services to those partners. So they're really only reporting their reach year over year, and they're just focusing on telling the story of how the organization fills a gap in an ecosystem, and how maintaining operations to keep filling that gap and making sure that these general resources are available is a critical need, and how the organization has a track record of filling this gap. Now, conversely, if they needed to tell a program story, they would need to say, okay, you're filling that gap with what? The program story is the with what. We're filling that gap with workshops and networking events and skill building and advocacy services and policy change. So now, if we need to talk about those things, we could write a grant just for the policy change. We could just write a grant for the skill building and the workshops. We could just write a grant for the networking. And if we got funded for those things, a portion of it would cover the manager's salary, but we're talking about those programmatic pieces. Is that helpful, Monique?
Yes, thank you.
Can I add something to that, Naya?
Of course.
Most funders recognize that there are some administrative costs associated with your programming work. And so they may allow 5 to 10% where you can just allocate those monies there. Now that 5 to 10% may not cover all of your administrative costs or your organizational costs, but it can help to chip away at them so that they can become funded in part. Also, what I often see in working with smaller organizations is that we don't always adequately factor in all of the costs associated with the program itself. Oftentimes there is expense that is left out of that equation when a budget is put together. Usually it's personnel. People will put in the supplies and they'll put in all those direct costs, but they don't always put in, or the obvious costs, but they don't always put in personnel. Maybe they don't even know how much time each one of their staff members or team members spends on that particular program. Perhaps they have 3 programs and they haven't really sat down to say, okay, how is our time split across these programs? So if you have a program director and that program director is managing 3 programs, we should see their cost, their salary or stipend or whatever it is that you're giving to them reflected across those 3 programs. If you have other staff that's more administrative, perhaps you have an administrative assistant that is not directly associated with any specific program, that would be something you would include in that 5 or 10% of your project or program proposal. So really, it's just kind of getting a little bit into the weeds of the real, true, accurate costs to run your program, not forgetting anything. And it's okay to ask for partial funding. Most funders don't want to have the entire risk of funding your full program. That's actually quite rare. They actually would prefer to see that you have made efforts to secure other funding, and they maybe are filling in a gap for you or just helping you to reach that finish line. It gives them greater confidence that you actually even have the ability to kind of pull your program off. So it's okay to have a $60,000 budget and only ask for $10,000 or only ask for half. Right? But what you don't want to do is you don't want to trim your budget to match the funder. So if the funder is only offering $25,000, you don't want to trim your program budget to $25,000, right? No, you want to say, this is how much our program costs. We're asking for the $25,000 to cover this portion of it. And here's our plan to secure the funding for the rest of it. This is a very important thing that I see over and over. People will scale it back. And then the funder sees that because they're like, wait a minute, how are they going to pull this program off with this little budget, right? Yeah. So be true and accurate with how much it's going to cost you to deliver your program effectively in accordance with what you've sought to do.
And to add to that, I was in a meeting with a funder recently, and the executive had asked what was a good ask, and the funder had shared, don't ask for more than 1/3 of your budget. Like, you should have other funding sources. Now, I say that to also shout out the Baltimore City Youth Fund because it's exceptional in that way. You know, they are more open to being the first grant source for many organizations. Yet we are at 6:50 and we got a lot to get through. So I am being mindful of the time and moving forward. Again, if you have to hop off at 7, please practice self-care and find yourself checking out the recording. But we will keep moving forward with our presentation. So now that you have qualified the grant, you need to get ready to write. Some questions that you'll want to ask yourself up front is what information or documents do you need to gather or prepare? You'll definitely want to make sure that you know what attachments you already have on file and what attachments need to be produced. If you already have them on file, great, keep going. If you need something produced, you got to guard time for that, or you need to delegate to somebody to produce that. So this is where it comes to the next question. Who needs to be involved in your grant writing process? It happens all of the time that you find a grant or you forgot about a grant and it's 1 week before or 2 weeks before and you're rushing and you're only putting half of your brain but all of your heart into this resource that you really need. When you learn about a grant opportunity, put time on your calendar to qualify it and delegate to the team that you have, even if that's delegating to yourself by guarding more time. I encourage you to get your treasurer involved in the financial process or your financial staff or volunteers, and make sure that if you have a team on the program side who's involved in evaluation, make sure that they're queued up as well. And then where might you benefit from technical assistance being offered, especially when you have the resources of the Baltimore City Youth Fund available to you? Take advantage of those resources. If you know that you need a budget, but you don't have one, get scheduled for a one-on-one session and let's develop that together. So you have got your ducks in a row. You've queued up your team and the pieces, letters of supports and budgets are being developed. And you're trying to figure out what your ask is going to be and what you need to write towards. If an RFP makes a scoring rubric available to you, review that rubric before writing. It will make your approach better. Incorporate that rubric language into your writing. And then after you're done writing, read your grant all the way through against the rubric. It is there for a reason. The review teams use them. So make sure that that is one of your steps that you go through before you write your grant. Baltimore City Youth Fund does make a scoring rubric available. So be sure that you give that a look. All right, since we are talking about an intro to grant writing through the Baltimore City Youth Fund, and we're considering how, what's in their rubric and where do we align, what you'll see in a lot of organization and a lot of funders is a list of priorities. Baltimore City Youth Fund has 3 overarching priorities, and they have broken those down to different initiatives that they're specifically looking for. So I want to pause here for a minute. I want you to take a look at these different priorities, and I want you to write down for yourself, where does your organization align? Because I'm going to ask you to write a value proposition or consider a value proposition with that priority in mind. Once you have identified where your organization aligns, and you can align in more than one area, feel free to share it in the chat if you don't mind. We are strengthening the village with our youth-centered spaces. We are fostering authentic youth leadership, empowerment, and self-actualization through our youth-centered mentorship. Where does your organization align? right, thank you for sharing where you align. Building life skills and leadership development. We have youth-centered enterprises, developing future leaders, one girl at a time. All right, getting into the specificity of who you serve as well. Fantastic. All right, so now that we've narrowed those impact areas, let's write a strategic value proposition. So that strong paragraph that had data integrated and was really clear about how what the work is and what it produces. You can think of your value proposition as kind of that elevator pitch, that framing narrative that helps you define the approach for that ask. I write a value proposition in every grant that I write. It is helpful framing for me and the executives that I'm working with. Every value proposition that I write has these components. There is an equity analysis defining the gap. This is the gap that exists. This is the gap that we're filling. And then we make the ask out front. So there's an equity analysis, a solicitation, a solution statement, some statement about how we know that it works, how we know we have the capacity to deliver, and why this is an urgent need that should be funded. So you'll see that there's some common language that is included in each value proposition, and kind of just like fill the gaps in those brackets. So if your priority was strengthening the village through youth-centered spaces, your value proposition might sound something like this. Youth-centered spaces, strengthening the village through offering youth-centered spaces is a need that exists because Black and Brown youth in West in Baltimore City do not have access to safe after-school spaces. There's a predictable lack of safe after-school spaces, which creates an increased risk of youth falling into negative alternatives. We seek $150,000 in order to advance the availability of safe havens for youth in West Baltimore. If we make our youth safe haven available, then we will be able to serve 30 youth daily in the neighborhoods of Franklin Square and Poppleton. We know that this works because we have been providing these services to 20 youth annually for the last 30 years, and these funds will allow us to expand our capacity to serve 30 youth. We have the lived experience and expertise to deliver these services because our staff have a background as teachers, educators, social workers, etc. And this is an urgent need. We must deliver, make safe havens available to youth. Otherwise, this pattern of youth falling into negative alternatives will continue. You'll specify that with data and what you know about the people and populations that you're serving, but hopefully you see how you can use a value proposition framing to articulate what your organization is doing, how it's approaching it, and what results you're generating. So I want to pause there, give you a minute or two to process and take some notes, maybe start writing your value proposition. If we had more time, I would have us walk through each of these and write them down one statement at a time. For those of you who are needing to hop off at 7, I would like to invite you to offer us some feedback on this intro to grant writing workshop. If you do have to hop off at 7, please do complete this post survey so that we can continue improving this workshop for you and others in the future. As well, before folks have to go, I do want to make these slides available to people. So for anybody who does need to leave at 7, here is the slide deck. So you don't have to take screenshots, you can easily look back. All right, so you have written a value proposition and framed your ask. Now you should be able to add detail to that framing. That detail is different for every grant. Again, every grant that has a scoring rubric, you'll want to make sure that the detail that you're adding is aligned with what they care about in that scoring rubric. So with the BCYF grant, that means that, you know, they want you to speak to their values as a part of your values. They want you to speak to the population that you're serving and the track record that you have in serving that population. They want you to show and demonstrate that you have quality programming, and they want you to talk about the logistics. Like there is that like, how do you know that your organization's successful? How do you know that you're curating experience? Some of the common guidelines that you're going to come across is information that covers your entire organization, information that is about that specific program or project, and financial information. So let's start bottom up. So for financial information, you're going to need to produce a budget. You may need to produce financial statements for your current year or prior year. And you'll often need to share something about your revenue model. When funders talk about sustainability, they're typically talking about financial sustainability. They're wondering what other funders are out there, like what earned revenue do you have, what grants do you have, how many individual donations do you have, and what other types of funding sources are you securing. So be prepared to share more in writing about your finances. When it comes to budgets, you're going to tell your numbers story, and then sometimes you have to share a budget narrative. Budget narrative is like, here is this staff member and 1 to 2 sentences about what they do. Here are these supplies, and here's why these supplies matter, 1 to 2 sentences. So narrative guidelines, when it comes to financial information, it's translating those numbers into words. For program and project. Okay. This one is like a little bit of an interesting item, because funders, because they often are giving in 1-year increments, and then you can't go back to them for another year, or you have to reapply the next year. They take this thing that you do year over year, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years in a row, and they want you to put it into project language. What that means is that, on X date, here's our starting point, and by Y date, here's what we'll produce. So you kind of have to take your organization and put it on a timeline. Even if it's not a guarantee, they're asking you to make some confident estimates about what you'll deliver. Within that, they're going to want you to talk about so that's like talking about your expected results within milestones and a constrained timeline. They're going to want to know, how are you going to produce those results through your progress monitoring and evaluation? They're going to want to know what you're monitoring and evaluating. What activities are you implementing? How frequently are you implementing them? And they're going to want to know what background you have in systematizing and delivering and implementing these services. And then there's just the logistics of who you're serving and where you're serving. So you have to take your work that you may have been doing for 5 years, 7 years. You have to put it on a timeline. You have to mark your milestones and anticipated results, And then you also need to articulate your background so that they know that there's a justified reason that you have structured things this way. So that specific thing that you're doing is just one part of that larger story of who you are and what you do. So they also want to know your who's on your team, who's marshaling this mission. And they also want to know why this vision, why this mission, why this approach. And often they'll ask for your organizational history. Sometimes they'll ask for your founder's founding story. So I often like to think about narratives as a story and weave in the academic things as I go. When I think about a founder's story, I think about, how this organization sees a day, a vision, when this thing is possible. In order to make that vision possible, we provide the following services. We provide these following services in this way. And our team does this through daily service with these activities. We provide these daily services and activities to these people in these places. And we have been doing this for this amount of time. If this is your first year in operations, you might say, this is our first year in operations and we're standing on this precedence. This is the experience that we're bringing. And so you can see how you can articulate your vision, you can articulate your mission, your approach, and how your people are marching a mission forward while still telling the story and adding the detail and layers. So make sure that your narrative is answering the specific question the funders are asking, and as best as possible, tell a story that logically flows. All right, this slide right here. They got to get in your business and ask about your money. So the budget guidelines. All right, so one distinction that I want to make. Most grants that you go after are going to have two budgets that they ask for: your organizational budget and your financial statements. Your organizational budget is what is all of the money that makes up all of the organization. Your grant budget is what are you doing with this specific ask. The grant budget is always the one that takes longer because the organizational budget has usually already existed in some form somewhere. So a budget is going to describe your project that you put in words into numbers. Every funder has, many funders have a specific budget format. BCYF has a specific budget format that they're looking for. So in whatever state your organizational budget looks like, you'll have to roll that up and edit it to reflect what their budget form requires. So here with Baltimore City Youth Fund, if you're operating a $200,000 organization, if you're operating an organization that operates on $200,000 a year, you'll need to define what are you doing with how are you going to expend the $50,000 of the BCYF funds? Okay, let me say that again. If you're operating a $200,000 organization and you're asking for $50,000, you'll need to provide a $200,000 organizational budget, and you'll need to provide a $50,000 project budget that reflects how you'll spend those grant funds. You want your request for funds and your budget to reflect actual costs. If you've operated for a year and you've incurred expenses, that should be an easy thing to do because you just have to look back at your books and line up your numbers with the specific categories that they've asked. If this is your first time asking for a grant or going after money and you haven't developed an organizational or a project budget, you'll need to put in some pre-work. You'll need to do some research around costs. You'll need to do, some market research around salaries and contract rates, and you'll want to justify what you're asking for, not for the funder's sake, but frankly for your own sake. Being able to look at your grant narrative and look at your budget and see the same thing just in different detail is really important to funders. If they look at your grant narrative, they read your grant narrative and they look at your budget and they don't see feasibility, they're not going to fund it. So make sure that those two things are telling the same story. Kieran, I want to pause there and see if there's anything that you'd like to add.
I thought you hit it on the nail. Just really, making sure that you have an accurate picture of what it actually costs to do your program. Be realistic. These funders look at hundreds of applications a year. They know what's a realistic budget and what's not. So, really spend the time investing in that and thinking about what resources you need. Yeah.
Okay, y'all, we're almost at the finish line. You have some principles for how to approach the concept, the field of grant making. You have some framing for how to write your value proposition. You've got some understanding of what composes a grant and how to align your narrative with your budget. Now, some quick do's and don'ts we just want to be able to send you off with is that we do not recommend waiting until the last minute to apply, because you will benefit from reviews and revisions. In federal grants, they recommend that you submit your proposal a month in advance. That almost never happens. I almost never know that happening, but I do think it's a good idea to start framing your value proposition 1 month out. Start writing your grant 1 month out, and really try and make sure that your grant is in a near completed state 2 weeks out, so that if you can send it to your president, you can send it to your staff, you can send it to your advisor, so that some other set of eyes can help you review and revise. It's not always possible, but it's what you should aim for. Do review all available application materials before you submit. It's to your advantage. There's detail in there that will help you better align. And when you meet with their program officer, because you sent an email asking for a meeting, you'll be able to show them that you have a understanding of who they are, what they do, and why they're asking for what they're asking for. Do create a worksheet or template to file to work from and pace yourself. What this means is if they haven't made a Word document available for you to draft your narrative, make a Word document available, take their portal information and put it into a Word document. Sometimes that's as easy as copy and paste. Sometimes you need to do that because you are co-writing it with your teammates. It's easier to write with others on a Google document than it is to try and orient people to a portal. Do stay true to your mission and what you do best. There's something in the sector called mission creep. You will feel tempted because you want to help your people to go after funding that will make you do things that are not on mission. That is a bad partner. That is not a good grant to go after. Know your work, stay on mission, and the struggle is real. Like, it will take time, and we won't ever be moving fast enough. But make sure that you're not inviting mission creep by going after bad grants. Do develop a proposal that is data informed and program driven. Keep your research ongoing. Build your data systems. If you're not data savvy or system savvy, find someone who is. Put them on your list of not just advisors, but volunteers. There is a website called catchafire.com, where you can find skills-based volunteers who will help you approach and build some of this work. You don't have to do everything, but I do encourage you to begin establishing your data systems. Do use a spell/grammar check tool and another set of eyes. I was an English major. I worked at a writing center. I'm great at editing other people's documents, terrible at editing my own. You just get too familiar with your own narrative. So use Grammarly, use another set of eyes. Do not attempt to appeal to every funder in your proposal. General proposals generally lose. Revised, well-edited, well-curated proposals have a better chance. Make sure that you are aligning to that specific funder. Do not submit an incomplete or irrelevant proposal. If you're not speaking to their priorities, you won't win. And if you're missing information, you're making your application an easy no. I have had a handful of times in my career, a funder reach back and say, hey, you missed this information, can you submit it? That is almost never though. Do not upload your attachments before you are ready to submit. Have your attachments ready out front, put them in a folder, make it the last thing that you do, sign, submit. And then lastly, do sign up for technical assistance if you need it. BCYF is going to make technical assistance available to you. In the future, if you do not have a technical assistance provider, I encourage you to use services like Catch a Fire to find a volunteer who can serve as an advisor when you have a need. Now I just want to open it up to you all for any lingering questions. If you do not have any questions, I would encourage you to complete our post survey so that, again, we can continue improving our workshop. Over to you all. Any questions for us?
We do have one question in the chat from Toya. Actually, I hope I can share this. It came to me directly and I didn't see that until I just said that. But it's a general question about if you're writing for operating funds, but then someone's asking you for a project budget. I'll be honest with you, that's probably a red flag. If they're asking you for a project budget, that may be an indication that this is a restricted funding opportunity. So the first thing to do is just to go back and review the funder's RFP or the details for that particular grant to see if in fact they are accepting requests for operating funds. It does happen sometimes that they haven't updated their application to reflect that change. So maybe they normally did program requests, but now they're accepting operating, but their form still says project. Either way, you're going to want to confirm that first. And so, because generally they would ask you for your organization's annual budget to show how those funds are going to be used broadly. And then more specifically in your ask, you would talk about how, let's say the $25,000 that you're asking for is going to be used toward furthering what you guys have set forth for that fiscal year. So I hope that answers that question. I did want to also mention, Naya mentioned about research and how you use data. It's not always understood that research generally refers to some type of study. Some type of study or evaluation was done to support some sort of position or approach, right? So oftentimes what I'll see people do is they'll find like an article that talks about it, and it might be in any number of publications, but it's not an actual study. It could be someone's opinion. It could be an opinion piece. You want to stay away from opinion pieces and really look for research studies or pull information from published reports from the experts in your field, right? So if you're in the mental health field, you want to pull from some of those mental health expert publications that talk about how what you do is effective toward meeting the goals that you've set out to do. So I just wanted to make that distinction. Sometimes people are not always clear when a funder wants to see evidence or research. I see Naya's got something else there.
I know. I just here echo that. And a great way to approach that is looking at the city agencies that influence the work that you're doing. So, we're here at Baltimore City Youth Fund. All of us are providing youth services. So let's go take a look at Baltimore City Public Schools Blueprint for Success. That's going to outline their standards, their criteria, what they want to achieve, and what research what research is backing their approach. Baltimore City Health Department, also another place that is producing a lot of research on how to improve the health and wellness of families. Other questions?
And this is a small group, so if you have a question, you can raise your hand or you can speak up.
So I have a question. So I'm a little confused now. So you have so if your program has a hold on, I'm sorry. I jumped in the bed. I'm gonna take my so you guys can see me. So if your program has you have a large program, and then inside of the program you have individual programs. So I'm kind of confused about the terminology you guys use. So if when we want to submit we first submit our overall budget for the whole program, and then we break down for the individual program that they want to talk about, and we do an individual budget, pull it out from that main budget for the individual program. Is that right? Does that make sense?
You said that really well. Yeah. If your organization is $200,000 and that program is $75,000 total, you could go after $50,000 of that budget through BCYF.
It's a part of the program.
As a part of that program. So I'll use an example for an organization where I'm a board member. So this, I'll change the name. So we'll call it Ideal Family Center. Ideal Family Center provides family services, community services, and youth services to kids and families in Baltimore. And our budget is $250,000, $249,000. Our program, Women on a Mission, it's actually called Moms on a Mission. Moms on a Mission, that budget operates on $25,000 of that $250,000. So we could go after BCYF and double Moms on a Mission budget if it was actually youth centered. But if we wanted to fund Moms on a Mission, we could just write a narrative just for that program. And that's a common thing that happens. Like as a grant writer, I end up writing an organization narrative. I end up writing specific program narratives. And then I typically end up writing innovation narratives too. So it's like, here are the things that we do. Here's one innovative thing we would like to do, but we haven't started doing because we need to start up funding for that. So you'll find yourself, the more grants that you write, the more language, the common language that you have to pull from.
Okay, thanks.
Nobody has ever called me brief.
I would just commend you on the explanation, Naya. It's really about having these large, complex, like nonprofit management items and just making it, understood, like, because you're doing the work, right? Mr. Danita, I know you're out there, and I'm sure you probably run an organization that has multiple programs, so it exists. It's just about making it so that the funder can understand what you're doing.
Yeah, because I noticed that, like you guys said, you don't get grant funded for your whole program through one organization. So it didn't dawn on me till later that we should, create a program for each part of our program, our outreach program, our transitional housing program. So then I have to go back and create individual programs and individual budgets, but it would be a part of the whole budget. So that's where I was getting thrown off at. So the number should reflect once we move it over, and it should still equal out to be the same. So that's where I got kind of confused, but thanks.
I literally just saw that budget appear in my brain. Like I know that budget that you want. Yeah, definitely follow up with TA services if you need support developing out that budget. I can see it.
Okay,
There's one thing I did want to mention, Danita, you touched on, which was not trying to get your entire program funded for that one grant. And Naya alluded to this as well. A lot of funders don't want to take on that level of investment unless they have pretty strong confidence in your organization and your people and your program. However, there's a risk there for your organization too. What happens if that funder is delayed, doesn't come through, doesn't renew you for the next year? You know, so you want to have a little bit of diversity in your funding
okay,
as a safeguard for your organization.
okay,
So, you know, strategically thinking about, okay, there's 15 different funding opportunities. Okay, these 3 would probably be really good for this program. These 3 would be good for that program. You know, however you want to, you know, approach that. But as a matter of practice, we don't generally recommend, unless you know that funder very well and you know they fully fund and you know that they're likely to do that, then go for it. But a lot of funders have apprehension about that. So you're thinking ahead and letting them know, okay, here's our plan to raise the rest of this money. And it could include asking other funders. That's perfectly fine.
okay.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Sure. Just doing a time check. It is 7:26. We wanted to make sure that we wrapped up by 7:30. We appreciate those of you that were able to stay on for the deeper dive of the deep dive. I'm just gonna, you know, I guess we have the floor still open for any questions. Please do that survey just to give us some feedback. We do have more of these sessions to give. So if there's something we did really well, we want to make sure we keep that in. If there's an area that we could improve or topics that we didn't quite touch on that you were hoping to see, let us know.
I think Samira had a question. How are you doing?
Oh. Okay.
Oh, how are you guys? I'm like completely fangirling over you both. I really quickly, my question was around like fiscal sponsors. Is it generally better for small beginning, you know, kind of like startup nonprofits to try and just, you know, get a fiscal sponsor instead of, you know, trying to take on everything, you know, on their own, I guess in their first couple of years or first year or so?
There's really no common practice. You know, fiscal sponsorship has been around for decades. It's gaining in popularity, particularly in Baltimore, because there's a growing number of fiscal sponsors. It really has more to do with you, the people that you have around, the resources and capacity that you have around you, and what you want to, how you want to divide up the work. You know, going the due diligent path of registering your business, establishing your 501c3, building your board and your network, and really learning your business as you're building your business is going to benefit you in the long run. And you'll need to consider that even if you're a part of a fiscal sponsor. The going to a fiscal sponsor is a way of adding some capacity to your organization while you're also delivering activities that maybe are already in motion, or adding capacity to your organization when you're just like really confident not what steps you need to take, or you're just not sure where to start looking, or you just need that added advice as you go. But you can't get around needing to take those steps. So there's really no one right way. You just have to make the right decision for you. But I would also ask Kieta to offer her context as somebody who's very familiar with this sector as well.
Yeah, so like Naya said, it's truly a capacity issue. And also, you know, we can't assume that everybody's going to become like a nonprofit professional just because we say we want to start a nonprofit and we want to, you know, start this work. So there's something that you're passionate about. And I know of people who are having programs, and then a funder will just say, here's $10,000. Like, you're doing great work, and just keep doing the work. But there has to be a place for that money to live, right? We have to be held accountable for what we're doing, because it's not our money. These aren't our organizations. They belong to the people. So having that formalized fiscal sponsorship relationship will help you, you know, jump off and like become that independent organization if you are setting those benchmarks for yourself and you have that goal to become an independent organization. So it's also about what you want to do. Not everybody wants to have an independent organization. So it's really thinking about what you want to do, the time frame that you want to accomplish those goals, and then who that fiscal sponsor is. Like, are they offering capacity building, or are they just holding your money and processing checks for you? Like, what do you want that to look like? What is that relationship that you want it to be? So
yeah, I like, Kiana, would you agree that like if you go the fiscal sponsor route, you're actually like you should want accountability, because going the fiscal sponsor, right? Like you're going to be held accountable for the nonprofit that you've set out to develop.
Yeah, and you want to know all the things, right? I mean, as much as you can, especially this is in your wheelhouse. This is what you went to school for. Like maybe you're an educator or a yoga teacher. You need to know all the things so that you don't make the mistakes, especially in the beginning. Hope that helps.
If I may, there was a question in the chat while we were just talking there about newer organizations, like in their first year, some best practices for them. And I put in the chat here that look for seed funding opportunities, right? So you can look through the requirements for the application and get a sense of the type of organization that funder is interested in. If they're asking you for audited financials and they're asking you for 3 years and 990s, clearly they're not interested in startup organizations, right? So you're going to read the funder. What are they looking for? Are they looking to help startups? The Grassroots Fund, this is really looking for those grassroots organizations that are looking to level up. So you want to target those particular initiatives as you're searching for grants. And then you also want to try to find organizations that service these types of organizations, smaller organizations, because you get on their listserv, right? And then they'll be sending you notifications of opportunities that are really targeted to more startup, grassroots, smaller organizations, volunteer-led organizations, things like that. So you're going to want to focus on those if you can. And then from there, in terms of actually writing your proposal, be honest about where you are, right? So if you all are still building your staff, if you all are still growing the size of your program, maybe you started with 20 kids and now you're trying to level it up to 40 kids, be honest about that and then speak to what it is your plan is. And one thing I always recommend for folks is every organization has vulnerabilities. There is no perfect organization. So if you come to a question on a grant proposal and you're like, oh, you're not really strong in that area, identify it and say, you know what? We recognize that this is important to this work. Here's our plan to address it. We expect to be here by blah, 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 blah. Don't shy away from it. Don't ignore it, right? And not answer the question. Be proactive and deliberate in saying, here's how we intend to address this particular matter. And what that does is it's building the confidence of the funder that you're taking it seriously, that you have a plan to kind of get to what they're looking for, as long as it's not a requirement. So if they're saying an audit is required and you go in and say, well, we're working on the audit, that may or may not fly, right? But if they're saying, they're asking you about your professional development plan for your staff, you might not even have staff yet, but you can talk about, here's what we've explored. We would want to make sure our staff is trained in X, Y, and Z. Talk about what you would want to do and then how you plan to achieve those goals, right? So don't shy away from any vulnerabilities that you might have in your proposal, address them head on and build that funder's confidence. And Naya added something there. Did you want to elaborate on that, Naya?
Just what it says. That first year, you're probably going to go after smaller grants. It's rare to come across a grant like BCYF that might give you big dollars in your first year. Again, might. I can think of one startup fund last year where organization with no track record got we got $75,000. But those are so few and far between. Most organizations that are going from volunteer 0 to something need to start at that $2,500, $5,000, $10,000 ask.
Yeah, and just pay attention to the listserv for BCYF, because there will be more opportunities after this opportunity that you want to make sure that you take advantage of. And also OSI, they're going to come out with another round and be more invested shortly. Also BCF has like North by Northwest, and there's enough opportunities like smaller grants there. So lately, the funders are talking, right? They are having meetings regularly. They are talking about what works for grassroots organizations and what are some of those things, like that audit. It's always, you have to have an audit, like, but I'm only making $20,000, an audit costs $10,000. Why would I get an audit? It doesn't make money sense. So they're learning about what's happening in grassroots orgs and what's working and what's not working. And some of those barriers that have been there and have existed in the funding arena are starting to dissipate as more of us, show up in the room. And as we say what grassroots organizations, need as far as support and what they don't need as far as barriers. Thank you, Nah. Yes, MPN. Love them.
Sorry, somebody direct messaged me accidentally, and then I direct messaged you accidentally, Kiara. But they were just asking about the recordings.
Oh, the recordings, yes. So the recordings will be available once the communication department, it's going to be on YouTube. So if you check on there now, the ones that we've already done are posted. And I would say within like the week and a half, they'll get posted. So this is one out of about what I'm counting down. It's about 27 more workshops we have now until May 15th when the application is due. So one-to-one start on April 1st. You'll see that list on the bcyfund.org website. And if you have any questions, you want to get a TA, like immediate response, I won't say immediate, we'll give 36 hours to respond to you, but assistance@bcyfund.org is the email address, and you'll either get maybe a link to somebody's calendar if it's a deeper question and we might need to sit and like actually talk about it through with you, or you'll get an answer, like a quick answer. So please use those resources. We are here to work with and in community. And if anybody has any questions or anything, are we good to go? All right. Thank you, Naya. Thank you, Karen. Thanks to everybody who hung out with us. I think we might have to extend these to 90-minute sessions, but that's great. It was so much knowledge, and we really appreciate the time spent on preparing that presentation. The delivery was amazing. So thank you all for your hard work. We really appreciate it.
And thank you all for all that you do for our kids and our community.
Yes.
Thank you all. Have a great night, everyone.
Good night.
Have a good one.
Later.
Are you sure you want to stop recording? Oh, yes, I want to stop recording.